Welder fixes poor boy's wheelchair. The next day, 8 trucks stop at his house. Frank Miller stopped welding when he heard the soft knock on his workshop door. It was almost 7 in the evening, and he was ready to close up, but something about the persistence of those knocks made him hesitate. When he opened the door, he saw a young woman holding a small boy in her arms, a broken wheelchair beside her. The boy couldn't have been more than 2 years old, with light blonde hair and blue eyes that shone even in the dim streetlight. "Sir, please, could you take a look at my son's wheelchair?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "I've been to 3 shops today, and they all said they don't fix this kind of thing." Frank looked at the wheelchair. The wheels were loose, the armrest was broken, and there was rust in several places. It was an old chair, the kind the government hands out at public health clinics. "Ma'am, I work with heavy machinery, not with—" he started to say, but stopped when the boy looked right at him. There was something in that gaze that completely disarmed him. The child smiled and reached his tiny hand out, as if he already knew him. "Please," the mother insisted. "My name is Sarah, this is Ethan. He needs this chair for everything. I work as a cleaner in the corner office building, and I could only bring him here because I left early today." Frank sighed. He wasn't the type to help strangers, but something about this situation moved him unexpectedly. "Let me take a look," he said, picking up the wheelchair. "But I'm not making any promises." Sarah smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Thank you so much. You don't know how much this means to us." As he examined the chair, Frank realized the damage was worse than it seemed. It wasn't just a matter of tightening screws or replacing parts. The whole structure was compromised. "What's wrong with the boy?" he asked, testing the metal's strength. "Ethan was born with spina bifida," Sarah explained, adjusting her son in her arms. "The doctors said he needs the wheelchair to get around. When he's older, he might be able to use crutches, but for now—" Her voice broke. Frank looked up and saw tears running down the woman's face. "Don't cry, Mama," Ethan said, lifting his little hand to touch her cheek. "The man will fix it." The way the boy spoke with such certainty stirred something in Frank. At 42, he'd never married or had children. He'd always thought he wasn't cut out for those things. "Can you come back tomorrow morning?" he asked. Of course, Sarah said quickly. "What time?" "About 8. But listen, don't get your hopes up. This chair is in really bad shape." After they left, Frank stood staring at the broken wheelchair in the middle of his shop. Normally, he worked late, but that night, he felt different. He kept tinkering with the chair, taking it apart piece by piece to see what could be salvaged. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Frank worked until 2 in the morning. He realized he'd need new parts, special welding, and a lot more time than he'd thought. But every time he considered giving up, he remembered the boy's confident smile. The next morning, Sarah arrived right at 8. She wore the same cleaner's uniform as the day before, but her hair was washed and she had on a light shade of lipstick. Ethan was in her arms, dressed in clean but patched-up clothes. "Well?" she asked, trying to hide her nervousness. Frank pointed to the corner of the workshop, where a wheelchair that looked brand new stood. The wheels gleamed, the seat was padded, and he'd even painted the frame a light blue. "I can't believe it," murmured Sarah, covering her mouth with her hands. Ethan clapped and shouted, "My chair, my pretty chair." Frank placed the boy in the chair and adjusted the supports. Ethan began moving around the workshop on his own, laughing and making little sounds of joy. "How much do I owe you?" asked Sarah, searching for her wallet in her bag. "Nothing," replied Frank, avoiding her gaze. "Nothing? You worked all night, I can see that. I need to pay you something." "You don't have to. No child should go without being able to move." Sarah began to cry. Not from sadness, but from such overwhelming relief she couldn't control it. "Thank you," was all she managed to say. As she settled Ethan into the car to leave, Frank noticed an envelope had fallen to the ground. It was a plain, slightly crumpled envelope. He picked it up and hurried after her, but the car had already turned the corner. Curious, he opened it and found several medical documents inside. Test results, prescriptions, consultation notes. and among them, one sheet that made his heart stop. It was an estimate from a private clinic. Ethan needed complex spinal surgery. The cost? $100,000. Frank sat down in an old chair and reread the papers several times. The surgery was urgent. If it wasn't done within the next 6 months, Ethan could face serious complications. Even the movement of his legs was at risk. He tucked the papers into a drawer and tried to go back to his usual work, but he couldn't focus. The image of the boy smiling in his new chair wouldn't leave his mind. 2 days later, Frank received an unexpected visitor. A man in a suit and tie parked a black car in front of the workshop and stepped inside. "Frank Miller?" the man asked, extending his hand. "My name is Richard Thompson. I'm the president of Thompson Medical Equipment." Frank wiped his oil-stained hands on his shirt before shaking hands. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I'm here because of a video I saw online. Someone filmed you giving a wheelchair to a child. The craftsmanship was impressive." "What video?" Richard showed him his phone. It was a clip just over a minute long, capturing the moment Ethan tried out his new chair. Someone had filmed it from the street through the open workshop door. The video had over 50,000 views. "I didn't know anyone filmed that," Frank said, uneasy. "You did incredible handiwork. I'd like to propose a partnership. My company produces medical equipment, but we've always struggled to find professionals who combine skill with sensitivity. What kind of partnership?" "We'd like you to come work with us, develop custom equipment for special needs children. The pay would be very good." Frank felt a mix of interest and suspicion. This was exactly what he needed to get the money for Ethan's surgery, but something about the man's manner bothered him. "I need to think about it." "Of course, but don't take too long. We're in a hurry." Richard left a business card on the workbench. "Oh, and one more thing. The child in the video, are you related?" "Why do you ask?" "Professional curiosity. We're considering using the story for an ad campaign. Disabled child, talented craftsman helping. It's a narrative that sells well." Frank's suspicion turned to irritation. The man was talking about Ethan as if he were a product. "I'll think about your offer," he said, gesturing toward the door. After Richard left, Frank sat reflecting. The money would be useful, but using Ethan for advertising didn't feel right. He tucked the card into a drawer and tried to forget the conversation. The following week, Sarah returned to the workshop. This time she was flustered and carried a bag with broken pieces of the chair. "Frank, sorry to bother you again. The chair broke." "How? I welded it properly." "It wasn't your fault. Ethan's been playing around with it a lot, testing its limits. Yesterday he went down a hill and hit a tree." Sarah smiled despite her worry. "He's so happy. I've never seen him this active." Ethan was sitting on his mother's lap, with a small bandage on his arm, but smiling as always. "Uncle Frank, can you fix it again?" the boy asked. "Of course, champ." As Frank inspected the damage, Sarah sat in a chair next to the workbench. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why did you help us? Don't get me wrong, but you didn't seem very welcoming at first." Frank stopped working on the chair and looked at Ethan, who was playing with a small wrench. "I can't explain it. I think it was the way he looked at me, like he knew I'd help." "He has that gift," Sarah said, smiling. "He always wins people over." "Sarah, can I ask you something too?" Frank hesitated. "Ethan's father, does he help you?" Sarah's smile vanished immediately. "Ethan's father isn't part of our lives. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's okay. It's just complicated," Sarah sighed. "Ethan's father is an important man here in the city. When he found out I was pregnant and that the baby would be born with a condition, he disappeared. Never checked in on us again." "What kind of important man?" "A businessman. Owns several companies. Rich." Sarah's voice turned bitter. "I worked as a secretary at one of his companies. That's how we met." Frank felt anger toward a man he'd never even met. How could someone abandon their own child, especially one with special needs? "Does he know Ethan exists?" "He does. He even offered me money to leave town. Said he didn't want me causing trouble for him." "And you didn't take it?" "Never. Ethan was born here. He has the right to grow up here. Besides, he needs the doctors here. I can't just run away. Frank finished fixing the chair in silence, processing everything he'd heard. When he handed the chair back to Ethan, the boy hugged him and said, "Thank you, Uncle. You're my friend." That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Sarah and Ethan's situation, a single mother working as a cleaner to support a child with special needs, while the biological father lived a comfortable life without taking any responsibility. The next day, he decided to look for Richard Thompson. Maybe he could negotiate a job that paid well enough to help with Ethan's surgery, without using the boy for publicity. Richard's company was in a modern office building downtown. The lobby was all glass and marble, a far cry from Frank's simple workshop. "Mr. Miller, glad you came," Richard said, welcoming him into a huge office with a view of the city. "Have you decided to accept our offer?" "I want to understand better. What kind of work would it be? Developing custom medical equipment, wheelchairs, crutches, prosthetics. There's huge demand and few qualified professionals. And about using the boy's story for publicity?" "Ah, that." Richard smiled in a way Frank didn't like. "It's a key part of the project. We need an emotional narrative for our products. Your story is perfect." "What if I don't want the boy involved? Then we don't have a deal." The answer was blunt and cold. "Business is business, Mr. Miller. We're not a charity." Frank stood up. "Then we don't have a deal after all." "Wait. Don't be hasty." Richard grew serious. "I know you found the boy's medical records. I know he needs an expensive surgery. I know you don't have the money." "How do you know that?" "I did my research. The boy's mother works as a cleaner in one of my company's buildings. Information isn't hard to get." Frank felt a chill. There was something sinister in the way Richard spoke. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can help with the surgery. My company has connections with the best clinics in the country. We can resolve this quickly, but I need the story for the campaign." "Are you blackmailing a sick child?" "I'm offering a solution. The choice is yours." Frank left the room without looking back. Outside, he stopped to take a deep breath and try to control his anger. Richard Thompson was a dangerous man, capable of using any situation for his own benefit. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Back at the workshop, Frank found Sarah waiting with Ethan. She seemed nervous. "Frank, I need to talk to you. Something strange happened." "What?" "This morning, my boss called me into his office. He said he heard I was bothering important people and that maybe I should look for another job." "Did he say who these important people were?" "No names, but I have a suspicion." Sarah lowered her voice. "I think it has to do with Ethan's father." Frank felt his blood boil. First Richard trying to blackmail them using the boy's surgery, now someone harassing Sarah at work. "Sarah, can you stay here today? I need to handle something." "Here at the workshop?" "Yes, there's a small space in the back where you can stay, just for today until I figure out what's going on." Sarah agreed, worried but trusting Frank. Ethan was thrilled at the idea of spending the whole day in the workshop, playing with the small tools Frank had set aside for him. That afternoon, Frank got an unexpected call. It was from a woman who introduced herself as a journalist. "Mr. Miller, this is Jennifer Davis from the City Today newspaper. I'd like to interview you about the work you did with the child's wheelchair." "Not interested, but it's a beautiful story. It could inspire others." "I said I'm not interested." "Mr. Miller, I know there's more to this story. I know the child needs an expensive surgery. I know the child's father is a well-known businessman in the city. I can help you." Frank fell silent. How did this journalist know so many details? "Who gave you this information?" "I can't reveal my sources, but I can share important details about the child's father. Details that could change everything." "What kind of details?" "I'd rather discuss it in person. Can I come to your workshop tonight?" Frank looked at Ethan playing on the floor and Sarah organizing some parts in a box. He decided to take the risk. "Come, but just you. No cameras or recorders. Jennifer arrived at 7. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a determined gaze. Sarah tensed up when she learned she was a journalist. "You can trust her," Frank said. "She claims to have important information." Jennifer introduced herself to Sarah and Ethan, then got straight to the point. "Sarah, Ethan's father is William Thompson, correct?" Sarah turned pale. "How do you know?" "Journalistic research, and I know Richard Thompson from Thompson Medical Equipment is William's brother." Frank felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Richard was Ethan's father's brother. Everything made sense now. The blackmail, the information he had, the pressure on Sarah's job. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "William Thompson has other children he never acknowledged, at least 3 that I've uncovered. All their mothers were pressured to leave town or take bribes to stay silent." "My God," Sarah whispered, sinking into a chair, but this time could be different. The wheelchair video went viral. Thousands of people are sharing and commenting on it. If the real story comes out, it could cause a scandal even the Thompson brothers can't cover up. "What do you want from us?" asked Frank. "Permission to publish the full story, with names, photos, documents. It's the only way you'll have the strength to stand up to them." Sarah stood up and walked over to Ethan, who was sleeping in a chair. "What if they retaliate? What if they hurt Ethan?" "Sarah," Jennifer said gently, "as long as you stay silent, they'll keep controlling your lives. Richard already tried to blackmail Frank. Your boss has threatened to fire you. This won't stop." Frank looked at Sarah and saw the fear in her eyes. It was too big a decision for her to make alone. "Jennifer, can you give us some time to think?" "Of course, but not too long. I have information that Richard is preparing something. He plans to sue you for defamation, claiming you're misusing his company's image." After Jennifer left, Frank, Sarah, and Ethan had dinner together in the workshop. It was a simple meal, sandwiches and soda, but there was something special about that moment. It felt like an improvised family, brought together by adversity. "Frank," Sarah said once Ethan was asleep, "why are you doing all this for us? You barely know us." Frank stayed quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "You know, Sarah, I've always been a closed-off person. Never had family, never got involved in other people's problems. But when I saw Ethan in that broken chair, and especially the way he trusts people," Frank paused to breathe, "I guess I realized I was missing out on life by not having anyone to care for." Sarah held his hand. "You saved our lives. The chair was just the beginning. Now you're protecting us from the Thompsons." "I haven't protected you yet, but I will." The next morning, Frank woke to noise outside. Voices, lots of them. He got up and looked out the workshop window. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 20 people, all holding signs. He stepped out to see what was happening. The signs read things like, "Justice for Ethan," "Thompson take responsibility," and "Children aren't props." An elderly woman with white hair approached him. "Are you Frank, the welder?" "I am. I'm Mrs. Margaret from Blossom Gardens. I saw the story about you online. I came to show support." "What story?" Mrs. Margaret showed him her phone. Jennifer had published the article overnight. The headline read, "Hero Welder protects special needs child from pressure of powerful businessmen." "She published it without our permission," Frank murmured. "And she did the right thing," Mrs. Margaret said. "Stories like this shouldn't stay hidden." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Frank, we want to help. What do you need?" Before Frank could answer, 2 black cars arrived. Richard Thompson stepped out of the first one, followed by 2 men in suits. An older man, Frank assumed it was William Thompson, got out of the second car. "Clear this crowd," Richard told the men with him. "By what authority?" Mrs. Margaret challenged, stepping in front of Richard. "We're on public property." William Thompson approached Frank. "You're the welder? I need to speak with you in private." "We have nothing to discuss." "We do. It's about my son." The crowd fell silent. It was the first time William Thompson had publicly admitted Ethan was his son. "Now he's your son," someone from the crowd yelled. William ignored the comment and kept his eyes on Frank. 5 minutes, just the 2 of us. Frank glanced at the crowd, who gestured for him to refuse, but he decided to hear the man out. 5 minutes right here in front of everyone. I'd prefer here or nowhere. William sighed and looked around. He had no choice. I came to propose a deal. I'll pay for Ethan's surgery, give you a sum to start a new life in another city, and you stop this campaign against my family. What about Ethan? Doesn't he have the right to know his father? Ethan will have everything he needs. A private doctor, private school, top-notch treatment, but far from here. And if we refuse? William looked at Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. You won't have a choice. My lawyer has already prepared the papers. We'll file lawsuits for slander, defamation, and misuse of image. You'll lose the shop, and she'll lose custody of the child. The crowd began shouting in outrage. Mrs. Margaret pointed her finger at William. You scoundrel, threatening a sick child. Frank felt anger rising but controlled himself. He needed to think clearly. I'll talk to Sarah and give you an answer by the end of the day. You have until noon, said Richard. After that, the lawyers take over. The two brothers left, but the crowd stayed. People brought chairs, water, and food, turning the front of the shop into a spontaneous vigil. Sarah had hidden in the back during the argument, but heard everything. When Frank returned, she was crying. They're going to take Ethan from me, she sobbed. They won't take anything from anyone, Frank replied, more determined than ever. But you heard them. They have lawyers, money, power. What do we have? Frank pointed to the window, where the crowd in the street was growing. We have the truth, and we have people who care. Around 10 in the morning, a different car arrived, an old blue Beetle. A thin man in his 60s stepped out carrying a briefcase. Mr. Frank, I'm Dr. Harold Bennett, an attorney. I'm here to offer my help. How much do you charge? Nothing. My daughter was born with a disability 30 years ago. I know what you're going through. Doctor, Bennett explained he'd followed the case online and that the Thompsons weren't as powerful as they seemed. There were irregularities in their businesses that could work in Ethan's favor. The key is establishing paternity legally, he said. With that, Ethan is entitled to child support and inheritance. The surgery would be the father's obligation, not a favor. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. As they spoke with the lawyer, Jennifer arrived with a camera and a photographer. Can I film this? It's for the TV news. They want to do a special feature. Sarah hesitated, but Frank encouraged her. It's our only chance to tell our side before they control the narrative. The interview was emotional. Sarah bravely shared her story, showing Ethan's medical records and explaining how she'd been abandoned during the pregnancy. Frank spoke about how he met the family and why he chose to help. Ethan, who had woken from his nap, played with his new chair while the adults talked. Every now and then, he'd stop to smile at the cameras or wave at the people outside. At 11:30, another black car arrived. William and Richard stepped out, followed by 3 men in suits, likely lawyers. Last chance, William said to Frank. Take our offer or face the consequences. I've already spoken to my lawyer, Frank replied, gesturing to Dr. Bennett. We'll see you in court. Your shop will be shut down for violations by tomorrow, one of the Thompsons' lawyers said, and you'll answer for practicing without a license. What violations? Asked Dr. Bennett. Operating without proper permits, uncertified equipment, unsafe conditions for minors. Frank realized they had prepared for every angle of attack, but he wasn't willing to back down. Do whatever you want. We won't accept blackmail. The cars left, but minutes later, 2 city trucks arrived with inspectors. The crowd was outraged but couldn't stop the inspection. The inspectors found a few minor violations, outdated paperwork, expired fire extinguishers, and would shut down the workshop the next day. This is harassment, Mrs. Margaret said to one of the inspectors. You know it is. Ma'am, I'm just following orders, the inspector replied, clearly uncomfortable. When the inspectors left, the crowd fell silent. Everyone knew this was just the Thompsons' first move. Dr. Harold Bennett pulled Frank and Sarah aside for a private talk. They'll keep tightening the screws. That's how powerful people operate. They create small problems until you're too tired to fight. What can we do? Sarah asked. Fight back. I'll file for paternity recognition today. I'll also request an injunction to force William to pay for Ethan's surgery immediately. Will that work? It'll put pressure on them. They'll have to defend themselves instead of just attacking. That night, the vigil in front of the workshop continued. People brought lanterns, candles, and blankets. Frank, Sarah, and Ethan ate dinner outside with everyone. That's when Ethan, playing in his wheelchair, rolled up to an elderly woman sitting in a beach chair. "Grandma, do you have a chair like mine?" the boy asked. The woman smiled. She also used a wheelchair, but hers was much older and simpler. "Similar, yes, sweetheart. Uncle Frank can fix yours too. He's really good." Frank overheard and walked over. "Ma'am, sorry, I don't know your name." "Dorothy. And don't worry about my chair, young man. It's old, just like me." "Nonsense," Ethan said, using a word he'd learned from a cartoon. "No one's too old for a nice chair." Mrs. Dorothy laughed warmly. "This boy is wise." Frank examined her chair. It was in terrible shape, but nothing he couldn't fix. "Mrs. Dorothy, if you'd like, I can take a look at your chair. Once all this mess is over." "I don't have money to pay, son." "Who said anything about payment?" Another person in the crowd overheard. "My mother needs a new chair too. She's using crutches because hers broke." "My neighbor does as well," someone else said. Frank realized many people had similar needs, and an idea struck him. "Dr. Bennett, can I ask a legal question?" "Of course." "If I wanted to open a workshop specializing in equipment for people with disabilities, what kind of license would I need?" "Depends on what you want to do. Repairing existing equipment is one thing. Manufacturing new equipment is another." "What if it's both?" Dr. Bennett smiled. "Then you'd need specific licenses, but I know people who can help with that." That night, Frank barely slept. He kept thinking about the idea forming in his mind. What if he turned the Thompsons' pressure into an opportunity? What if he used all this attention to create something bigger? The next morning brought a surprise. Several cars parked in front of the workshop, but they weren't the Thompsons. They were ordinary cars with whole families inside. A woman approached with a 5-year-old girl wearing leg braces. "Mr. Frank, I came from Washington, D.C. I saw your story on TV. My daughter was born without legs and her braces are too small. No one in my town can adjust them." An elderly man stepped out of another car, carrying broken crutches. "Son, I'm from Ohio. These are my wife's crutches. She can't leave the house anymore because they broke." Soon a line formed with over 20 people, all holding broken or inadequate equipment. Frank was moved, but also worried. The workshop was sealed shut, and he couldn't work. That's when a large truck arrived, followed by several smaller ones. A man in overalls stepped out of the first truck. "Frank Miller, I'm Mike Wilson, president of the Metalworkers Union. We're here to help." "Help how?" "We brought tools, equipment, and materials. We're setting up a temporary workshop right here on the street. If the city wants to seal it off, let them try." The trucks began unloading welding machines, workbenches, tools, and metal parts. Within 2 hours, a fully equipped workshop stood on the street. William and Richard Thompson arrived with more lawyers, but they found a situation very different from what they'd expected. Over 100 people filled the street, journalists from various cities, union members, local politicians. "This is outrageous," Richard said to a court officer accompanying him. "You can't work on public property." "Oh, we can," Mike replied, holding up paperwork. "We have a permit from the city for a charity event." "What permit? The city knows us." "Knew you," said a woman's voice behind him. Everyone turned. It was an elegant woman in her 50s, wearing a business suit. "Who are you?" William asked. "I'm the new interim mayor, Dr. Elizabeth Parker. The previous mayor was removed yesterday under suspicion of corruption." William and Richard turned pale. All their political influence had vanished overnight. "And I have some interesting information about your companies," Dr. Parker continued. "It seems there are several financial irregularities that need investigating." The Thompson brothers left quickly, but Frank knew they'd return with new strategies. Dr. Harold Bennett approached him with a smile. "Things have changed. With the new mayor, we have more room to maneuver." "We haven't won yet," Frank said. "They still have a lot of power." "Yes, but now so do we." Throughout the day, Frank and several volunteers worked on repairing equipment for people who had come from other cities. Ethan was fascinated by all the activity, wheeling around between workbenches and helping where he could. A TV crew from Washington, D.C. arrived to cover the story nationally. The reporter interviewed several people in line. "Why did you come here?" he asked a woman from Washington, D.C. "Because for the first time someone cares about our special children, not as objects of pity, but as kids who deserve a good life." The reporter then spoke to Frank. "Mr. Frank, how does it feel to be called a national hero?" "I'm no hero, just a welder who learned that fixing things sometimes means fixing lives." "And the Thompsons? What do you think about the pressure they're putting on you?" "I think rich, powerful people need to learn that money can't buy everything, especially not the right to abandon their own children." That afternoon brought another surprise. A bus pulled up, and about 30 college students stepped out. "We're from the GWU engineering program," said a young woman who seemed to be the group's leader. "We want to learn from you and help with the project." "What project?" "The project to create affordable equipment for people with disabilities. Our bioengineering professor said it's the future of the field." Frank looked around. What had started as a favor for one boy was turning into something he'd never imagined possible. That evening, Dr. Bennett brought news. "I got the injunction. William Thompson was ordered by the judge to deposit the cost of Ethan's surgery with the court. If he doesn't pay within 48 hours, he'll be arrested for neglect of a dependent." Sarah burst into tears of relief. "Does that mean Ethan can have the surgery?" "It means yes. And more, we've filed a request to investigate the Thompson companies. If we find any irregularities, they'll have much bigger problems to worry about than you." On the second day of the makeshift street workshop, more people arrived, not just those needing help, but people wanting to help. A medical equipment entrepreneur from New York offered a partnership to produce equipment on a large scale. A university in California proposed a specialization course in assistive technology. An NGO from Los Angeles offered to fund social projects. Frank was overwhelmed by so many proposals, but happy to see how his simple initiative had inspired so many people. That's when Ethan tugged at his pants. "Uncle Frank, why are there so many people here?" Frank crouched down to the boy's level. "Because of you, champ. You taught me that helping people is important." "I taught you?" "Yes, you did. With your smile, your confidence, your way of making people feel special." Ethan smiled and hugged him. "You're my hero, Uncle." "No, Ethan. You're my hero." On the third day, William Thompson showed up alone, without lawyers or his brother. He was visibly shaken. "Can I talk to Sarah?" he asked Frank. "That's her decision." Sarah agreed to talk, but asked Frank to stay. They sat at a makeshift table in the corner of the street workshop. "Sarah, William started, but paused. "I came to apologize." "Apologize? For abandoning you, for denying Ethan, for trying to buy you off?" Sarah looked at him silently, waiting for him to continue. "These past few days made me think a lot. Seeing my son cared for by a stranger while William couldn't finish. "While you lived your comfortable life pretending he didn't exist," Sarah completed, not with anger, but stating a fact. "Yes. And now seeing all this mobilization, all these people who care about him, I realized I've missed 3 years of my son's life." Ethan, who was playing nearby, overheard and walked up to the table. He stared at William curiously. "Are you the daddy Mommy talked about?" the boy asked. William was speechless for a moment. It was the first time anyone had called him daddy. "I am," he answered, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you come see me?" The boy's simple, direct question hit William like a punch to the chest. He started crying in front of everyone. "Because I was a coward, son. Because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared I wouldn't know how to take care of you. Scared you wouldn't be what I expected." Ethan thought for a moment, then smiled. "But I'm nice. You don't have to be scared of me." William reached out to touch his son's face, but hesitated. "Can I give you a hug?" Ethan nodded and stepped closer. Father and son hugged for the first time as the entire makeshift workshop paused to watch. "Ethan," William said when they pulled apart, Can you forgive me for not being here before? I forgive you, but will you stay with me now? If your mother allows it, I'll always be here. Sarah was crying, but not from sadness. It was tears of relief, of hope. Ethan needs his father, she said. He always has. William turned to Frank. And you? I don't even know how to thank you for what you've done. You cared for my son when I didn't. You were the father I should have been. That's not it, Frank replied. I just opened the door. You're the family. But you'll always be part of ours, Ethan said. You're my Uncle Frank forever. That afternoon, news came about Richard Thompson. He'd been arrested for tax evasion and using fake documents. His company was under investigation for multiple irregularities. Seems your brother chose the wrong path, Dr. Harold Bennett told William. Richard was always like that. Since he was little, he thought he could buy or intimidate anyone. I let myself be influenced by him. And now? Now I'll take responsibility, as a father and as a businessman. William announced he would turn one of his companies into a non-profit institute to produce affordable equipment for people with disabilities. Frank would be the technical director, with complete freedom to develop projects. On the fourth day of the street workshop, the 8 trucks that would give the story its title arrived. The first truck brought medical equipment donated by hospitals from various cities. The second carried construction materials to build a permanent workshop. The third brought furniture and computers for the new institute's office. The fourth had state-of-the-art professional tools. The fifth, a complete technical library on assistive technology. The sixth brought a team of physical therapists and doctors who volunteered for the project. The seventh truck carried toys and adapted playground equipment for special needs children. The eighth and final truck brought the biggest surprise, a huge sign that read, Ethan Institute, Technology and Life. Ethan Institute? Asked Frank, moved. It was his idea, said William, pointing to his son. He said he wanted other kids to have chairs as nice as his. Ethan was beaming, moving from chair to chair, greeting everyone like he owned the place. Uncle Frank, are we going to help everyone now? The boy asked. We're going to help everyone, champ. The crowd cheered as the trucks finished unloading. There were enough materials to start building the new workshop right away. Dr. Harold approached Frank with more papers. I have news about Ethan's surgery. The hospital in New York secured a spot for next week, and the doctor is one of the best specialists in the country. What about the money? William already deposited it, not just for the surgery, but for the entire rehab treatment. Sarah picked Ethan up and danced with him around the workshop. Did you hear that, sweetheart? You're getting the surgery. And then will I be able to run? Ethan asked. The doctors think so, Dr. Harold replied. You might need leg braces, but you'll be able to run, jump, and play like any other kid. That night, a spontaneous street party broke out. People brought food, music, and drinks. Ethan was the center of attention, showing everyone how his chair worked and telling them he'd soon be able to run. Frank sat in a chair off to the side, watching the scene. It was hard to believe all this had started with a timid knock on his workshop door. Sarah sat beside him. What are you thinking about? How life can change in just a few days. A week ago, I was a lonely welder. Today you're the director of an institute, the adoptive father of a special needs child, and an inspiration to thousands. Adoptive father? Ethan sees you as much his father as William. To him, he now has 2 dads and a mom, a big family. Frank smiled and looked at Ethan, who was teaching other kids how to use wheelchairs. He taught me more in a week than I learned in 42 years. What did he teach you? That limitations don't matter. What matters is the size of your heart. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of perseverance and love. Do you believe small gestures can change lives? Share your thoughts in the comments about Frank and William's actions. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more uplifting tales that show the power of human kindness.